Hi, I am Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN, and I want to talk to you this particular episode on ovarian aging and why maintaining the longevity of your ovaries can actually be tantamount to increasing your total lifetime on Earth. In fact, longevity in women is actually dependent on ovarian aging or longevity. So it turns out that women who go into early menopause between the ages of 40 and 45, or premature ovarian insufficiency, meaning that they go into menopause before the age of 40, statistically have a shorter lifespan. Now, why is that? Well, those of you who've been listening to me know that long ago I stopped talking about the ovarian hormones, estradiol and progesterone, as sex hormones, and I started referring to them as life hormones, the hormones that are the givers and sustainers of life itself. Well, the ovaries are so interesting, and there certainly has not been enough research on them, but it's a little bit more buzzy now. There's more interest in menopause, women's health, and hopefully there'll be investment in research into women's ovaries. What keeps them ticking, and what makes them age so early in some women, and even in the best aged woman, they're going to be no longer making those life hormones by the time the woman reaches her mid to late 50s. And that's late because the vast majority of women are already in menopause by age 51 or so. For me, uh, I was only 43. Thank goodness I believed in the magical powers. I sometimes think they're actually magical of estradiol and progesterone, or I hate to think what my condition would be now. Because what has been shown is that when you lose those vital life hormones, every organ system in your body starts to go south. So, what are we talking about? There's a correlation between the age of menopause and the development of osteoporosis and its related fractures, which occur in over half of women and are either life altering and even life ending. What else? The cardiovascular system starts to head south, and more atherosclerosis, hypertension, cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes increase dramatically after the loss of ovarian function. In fact, without optimal hormone therapy, by age 65, that's just age 65, 75% of women will have hypertension. By age 65, women have more ruptured aneurysms and strokes than men and die more from their first heart attacks. By age 75, 85% of women have hypertension, high blood pressure, and that bodes poorly for many organ systems, including the brain. Well, what about the brain? When women lose their vital life hormones from the ovaries, they are more likely to have brain disorders. That includes mood disorders. The incidence of depression and anxiety at least doubles. That's serious business. If a woman has had a prior history of, say, postpartum depression or PMS or generalized anxiety disorder or depression, her chance of having a serious clinical depression or anxiety after menopause is up 400%. And what about cognitive function? Well, age matched. So if you took a load of people all age 75, guess what? If you have equal numbers of males and females, 70% of all those suffering from Alzheimer's will be female. And yes, the earlier you lose your ovarian life hormone production, the more likely that you will develop dementia, including Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, and other diseases that often are not associated with the brain because the eye is part of the brain. So women who lose their vital life hormones earlier, estradiol and progesterone, are more likely to develop things like glaucoma and macular degeneration. These are like really life modifying in a very negative way. Many women go blind from these conditions, and that is a terrible fate to suffer. So it's so important to do what we can to extend the lives of our ovaries, to have healthy, happy ovaries. Now, it turns out that many people are aware that energy is essential for brain function and heart function, but few people are thinking about ovarian function. Well, it turns out that ovaries are one of the most energy needy of all the organs. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to go through the process of maturing an egg from all the little follicles that get recruited and ovulating and then making this temporary endocrine structure called the corpus luteum, which then produces a great deal of estradiol and progesterone. Well, where does the hormone production begin? It turns out it's in these little organelles called mitochondria, sometimes called the powerhouse of the cells. They create energy. And as I just mentioned, ovaries need a ton of energy. Well, what can impair mitochondrial function, which is essential for making energy for the ovaries and for the production of testosterone, progesterone, estradiol? Well, it turns out that if you have inflammation, any source of inflammation, it can cause damage to those vital structures, mitochondria. So what are some of the ways that people can get inflammation that can then damage the function and numbers of mitochondria? So it turns out mitochondria need to get rid of themselves. We call that mitophagy when they get old or senescent, and they start creating damage in the cells and inflammation themselves. And that is a really big deal. So you need to have what's called mitophagy. So what triggers mitophagy? Well, crazy as it sounds, it's estradiol. You need to have estradiol to maintain the function and production also of new mitochondria, which we call biogenesis, creating new mitochondria. So estradiol is critical for mitochondrial function, but in turn, mitochondria are what start the production of estradiol. So you can see it's a sort of feed-forward situation. And if you have an exogenous or endogenous within the body or outside the body source of inflammation, the inflammation can damage the mitochondria so that they no longer are functioning optimally. And then the whole, it's like a house of cards, it comes crumbling down. So what are some of the key ways that a woman can develop inflammation? And then hence, how can she avoid this inflammation to try to maintain longer lived, better functioning ovaries? Not just for fertility. I didn't even mention fertility. But of course, for women who want to have babies, longer reproductive life and healthier, longer lived ovaries are rather essential. Now, it turns out, and I've mentioned this before, fertility is a vital sign of life. Ancient peoples would worship fertility gods. They knew fertility was vital to life and health. Well, it turns out that fertility and long-lived human females are totally intertwined. That's why when you now take, or if you are not a physician, if you go to see one, that person should be taking a fertility history. It's very key to predicting longevity and chronic diseases of metabolism like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So it turns out that women who have fertility problems during their reproductive years are more prone to, I hate to say this, dying younger and having problems like earlier onset and more severe metabolic problems like diabetes, heart disease, and even dementia. But I tell you this not to make it sound depressing, because there are things we can do. But let's talk about that. Okay, I mentioned we want to dampen down inflammation. One of the big sources of high inflammation is insufficient sleep. So it's so important to optimize sleep. Go to bed at a reasonable time. Make the room cool and wear a sleep mask like me so that you get rid of all the little light filtering through your eyelids that can dampen the production of melatonin, which is a critical, very powerful antioxidant. And you want to have good long sleep so that you can have the clearing of the old junk. That's how the brain kind of clears out through the lymphatic system. There's like a drainage system that gets rid of inflammatory stuff going on in the brain, but you have to get optimal sleep. What about fitness? Well, it turns out that exercise is phenomenal for mitogenesis, creating new mitochondria, and maintaining a less inflammatory environment of the body. And what about eating an anti-inflammatory diet full of phytonutrients, antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals, most of which come from plant foods, like vegetables of all sorts, fruits, nuts, seeds, and ancient grains like buckwheat and millet and quinoa, white corn on the cob. I'm not saying you shouldn't eat any animal protein, but when you do, try to make it from the best source that you can. As it's very hard because it's very expensive to buy the optimal type of animal protein. But do the best you can and try to focus and have a plant predominant diet, because that is really the best for lowering inflammation. And you've probably heard of the Mediterranean diet. It's not even clear exactly what that is. It means a little bit different things to different people, but predominantly it's plant focused, and it includes some fish. But now we have to be so careful about microplastics and heavy metals like mercury in fish. So it's not quite the Mediterranean diet from, like, say, 50, 60, 70 years ago, because we live on a different planet Earth. So, you just have to make the best choices you can, because things like environmental toxicants, chemicals in our environment that have a big negative effect on inflammation, gut microbiome composition, and hence mitochondrial function in our ovaries, is so important. So try to use the cleanest cleaning products, personal care products. Try to buy organic, best quality food that you can. So you want to also try to boost your immune system. Immunosenescence is also going to create systemic inflammation, which will lower the health and longevity of your ovaries. So keep that in mind as you try to make good decisions about taking supplements, about exercise and sleep, because all of those are very important for immune function. Stress. Well, stress will do you in. Stress creates systemic inflammation. I'm not going to go into all of that right now, so trust me on that, or Google it if you want. But chronic stress involves sympathetic upregulation, which is the autonomic nervous system's stress response, which also has an adrenal called adrenergic component, where you produce too much chronically elevated cortisol, which will damage your everything, okay? It's going to alter your gut microbiome. It's going to create more insulin resistance. And when you have higher levels of glucose, that too is going to create systemic inflammation. Now, I mentioned environmental toxicants. I have to mention smoking. Smoking has now been shown to shorten ovarian lifespan. Smoking is putting air pollution right into your ovaries. And I didn't mention air pollution. Separate from smoking, you need to be aware of the air quality. When it's really bad because of fires or other reasons, please try to avoid the outdoors and close the windows and get good air purifiers and turn them on. I hate to tell you, you have to stay indoors, and you should watch how you exercise so you don't have to breathe in too deeply. But we live in a world of terrible air pollution. There are some terrible fires raging in different parts of the US right now, creating terrible air pollution in certain areas. So be aware of the air pollution where you are so that you don't breathe in a lot of toxicants and particles and ozone and things that can actually create inflammation in your whole body and in your ovaries and lower their longevity. Now, if you're already in menopause, well, your ovaries have had it. Like me, I don't have ovarian function. So we need to be on physiologic cycling of our hormones. And of course, we're going to talk more about that. But if you're younger, or if you are older, but you have younger daughters, please talk to them about the importance of ovarian health. It's not just, although it is, about having a long reproductive lifespan so you can have babies when and if you want, but it's also about healthy longevity. And this is not getting enough publicity, that the ovaries are a critical organ in women's health and longevity. The longer your ovaries are functioning, the more medical probability-wise, the longer you will live. But thank goodness for hormone therapy. So those of us like me who lost ovarian function too early, I had early menopause, and I'm not going to talk right now about why I think that happened to me, but for those of us who are either in menopause or in the process and, we can't change where we are right now, thank goodness for hormone therapy. But I'm always going to be honest with you. It's not the same as having a 21-year-old pair of ovaries. Having your own ovarian function is, of course, better than any kind of hormone regimen I can prescribe. I do the best I can, but it's not as good as having healthy functioning ovaries. So care and nurture your ovaries if they're still working, and talk to your daughters and friends who have younger daughters who need to value the longevity of their ovaries and do everything to lower inflammation and maintain the proper mitochondria and capability of those vital organs to maintain ovarian function and these vital life hormone production for healthy aging and healthy optimal longevity.